I'm Jonah Elkins, 31 nonprofit event coordinator. The first time I saw her in the church that day, she was standing beneath the stained glass archway, holding a bouquet of ivory peonies like they weighed nothing. Her posture was perfect. Chin up, shoulders relaxed, the kind of poise you only wear when you've already buried the worst day of your life. And in her case, I knew that day had been me, but today wasn't hers. It was mine. My wedding, except you wouldn't have guessed it by the way the morning unfolded. The ceremony hall buzzed like a beehive, chairs dressed in white satin. A runner unrolled down the aisle, already catching bits of lint from nervous shoes. The string quartet rehearsed in the corner, plucking through Vivaldi like they were waiting for someone more important to arrive. Everyone else had. Except me. I stood in the hallway by the restroom. Not even backstage, just somewhere out of sight. My tie was askew, my collar itchy, the lapel flower limp from the humidity. A server passed by with a tray of champagne flutes, didn't even glance at me. "You can't stand here," a man in a headset said, walking briskly past. "Groom or not, you're in the path for catering." I blinked. "I'm not trying to. Please. Move." I moved. Into a little alcove by the janitor's closet. I could hear laughter coming from the front pews, my uncle's wheezy chuckle, my cousin's nasal bark, my mother's forced claps, like applause for a play she didn't enjoy. Then I heard her voice. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said gently into the microphone, "if you could all be seated, the ceremony is about to begin. Chloe, my ex-girlfriend, maid of honor, not just standing at the altar but commanding it." She had that calm, polished tone she used when giving work presentations, the one that made people lean in instead of tune out. Her hair was swept into a braided crown, her dress silvery blue, flowing, with tiny pearls along the waistline, was elegant in a way that didn't try too hard. It never did. It wasn't supposed to be this way. She wasn't supposed to be part of it at all. She's practically family. My fiancé had insisted months ago. She's closer to me than my actual sister. She knows me, trusts me. You said you were okay with it. I had nodded then. Because what else could I do? Chloe had smiled at me during the engagement dinner, and I'd smiled back like none of it hurt. But today, it wasn't numb anymore. It burned. The wedding planner tapped my shoulder again. Groom time. I stepped out. People turned, not to look at me, but to catch a glimpse of the bride behind me. I was just the curtain rising. As I walked down the aisle, I scanned the rows. My mother avoided my gaze. My father looked bored. Chloe stood at the front beside the best man, facing the crowd with a serene expression. Then she caught my eyes, held them, nodded. I forced a smile. We reached the front. The officiant cleared his throat. "We are gathered here today." The usual script. A string of phrases that felt more like subtitles than spoken words. My fiancé beamed at me, eyes wide, expectant. She looked radiant. I felt wrong. Then the officiant turned to us and said, "Now, before exchanging vows, the couple has chosen a special gesture. A trusted friend will read their words on their behalf." Whispers moved through the room like smoke. I hadn't agreed to that. I looked at her, my bride, and she gestured subtly toward Chloe. Chloe stepped forward, unfolding a piece of stationery. She held it like it was made of glass. My handwriting was unmistakable, but I hadn't handed it to her. I didn't breathe. She began to read. In the silence between storms, "I found your voice. Not loud, not demanding, just there. Constant, steady." Her voice was soft but carried. People leaned forward. Chloe didn't look at the paper. She looked at me. Read every word like it was a secret she already knew. She didn't cry, but she didn't smile, either. Just reverent. Like this was a eulogy, like she was burying something neither of us had permission to name. If you've ever had to stand still while your past is paraded through your present like a guest of honor, drop a comment. Let me know where you're watching from. Hit like or subscribe if you've ever been the second choice at your own celebration. Chloe's voice broke slightly as she neared the last line. And even when I don't deserve grace, I vow to return to you with open hands, never clenched fists. She folded the paper, stepped back, and then silence. The entire room fell completely, awkwardly, stunned. Not because of the vows, but because of her. Because she wasn't supposed to read them like she meant them. And yet, she had. Eyes turned to me, to her, to my bride. And that moment, still, brittle, electric, hung in the air, waiting for someone to say something. I felt it then, the shift, like the room had finally remembered who I was, like I had just arrived, fully, for the first time. There's a moment after a room goes silent where everything gets loud again, but only inside your head. The rush of blood in your ears, the sound of your own breath, the sudden doubt screaming at you to look around, to measure the damage, to figure out if you were just honored or humiliated. I looked at my fiancé. Her face was unreadable. I looked at Chloe. She had stepped back, eyes lowered now, no longer performing. The officiant cleared his throat. Again. "Thank you," he said, awkwardly, as though uncertain whether to acknowledge what had just happened. And now, the bride's vows, but even as the next voice began, part of the room was still with her. With Chloe. With me. It felt like the wedding had cracked open in that moment, and nothing afterward quite sealed it shut again. I got through the rest of the ceremony on autopilot. I said the right words. I smiled for the cameras. I kissed the bride. I turned to the audience as instructed, fingers laced with hers, pretending that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. But I was already drifting. The reception hall glowed gold from the afternoon light filtering through lace curtains. The band played some muted jazz number that made people sway gently, if not genuinely. Crystal flutes clinked. Laughter floated from the open bar. Everything smelled faintly of lilies, frosting, and someone's too strong perfume. People came up to me with compliments. Beautiful ceremony. You two are perfect together. Those vows. Wow. No one asked who wrote them. And I didn't volunteer, but I kept catching people looking at Chloe, not with suspicion, with something else. Curiosity, maybe, or the quiet recognition of something they weren't sure how to name. She sat at the maid of honor table, back straight, sipping from a flute of champagne like nothing in the world could touch her. She was talking to my brother, laughing, but I noticed her eyes flick toward me now and then. I don't know what I expected her to do. Leave. Avoid me entirely instead. When the dance floor cleared for the formal dances and the DJ called out the bridal party, Chloe stood and walked straight up to me. "Jonah," she said calmly, as though we were old classmates bumping into each other at a reunion. I swallowed. You should dance with her," she interrupted, nodding toward my wife, who was already making her way to the center of the floor. I waited, but Chloe didn't add anything else. No apology, no explanation, no plea. She stepped back, blended into the crowd, and I danced. Later that night, after the cake and the speeches and the garter toss, I found myself standing alone near the open doors that led to the patio. The sky was a dark velvet now, pricked with stars. The air smelled of roses and spilled champagne. Someone lit a cigarette nearby, and I turned to find my cousin, Rachel, leaning against a pillar. "I didn't know you still smoked," I said. "I don't," she said, exhaling. "But it's a wedding. Something's gotta burn." We both laughed softly. She eyed me. You okay? Yeah. She waited. Then said, I saw the way she looked at you. I didn't respond. Rachel continued. She read those vows like she wasn't just reading them, like she remembered writing them. I turned to her. She didn't write them. No, she said. But maybe she lived them. That landed hard. Rachel flicked ash off the end of her cigarette. People think the worst heartbreaks are the ones that end, but the ones that haunt you are the ones that almost made it. I didn't say anything. Didn't need to. She nodded at me once and walked back inside. I stayed in the dark. The next morning, our hotel suite smelled like pressed flowers and hairspray. My bride, now wife, was brushing her teeth in a white robe, scrolling through her phone with her free hand. I sat on the edge of the bed, tie loose, shoes kicked off, staring at the corner of the room where our suitcases were half unpacked. I didn't know she was going to read them, I said quietly. My wife turned toward me. What, Chloe? I didn't ask her to read the vows. She shrugged. I gave them to her. I blinked. Why, she offered? Said it would take the pressure off of us? I thought it was a nice gesture. There was a pause. She turned back to the mirror. You looked like you were about to faint during the rehearsal, she added. I figured you'd be grateful. I wasn't sure what to say, whether it mattered now. But then she looked at me in the mirror. Do you regret marrying me? It was not said angrily, just plainly. No, I said. But I also didn't say yes. She turned the faucet off. Silence filled the room again. Then she said, You know, she didn't cry once. Not at the rehearsal. Not backstage. Not after reading those vows. Not even when your mom hugged her. I didn't know that part. She looked right at me. My wife continued. Like she wanted me to know she'd already survived losing you. Like this whole day was just her closure. I didn't know what to say to that either. So I didn't. A week later, we were back home. The living room still smelled faintly of leftover party favors and wrapping paper. Thank you cards sat in piles. I was flipping through the wedding photos on my laptop, trying to choose which ones to send to the printer. There was one of Chloe, caught mid-laugh, her hand on her stomach, her eyes crinkled. No one else in the frame. And I stared at that one too long. Delete it, my wife said from behind me. I didn't argue. I just closed the laptop. Some things don't haunt you because they were bad. They haunt you because they were beautiful and unfinished. I never reached out to Chloe. She never reached out to me. But a month after the wedding, I received a small package in the mail. No return address. Inside was the piece of paper with my vows, folded carefully, smelled faintly of her perfume. No note, just the paper. And a line underlined in blue ink. Even when I don't deserve grace, I vow to return to you with open hands. I sat with it for a long time, not because I didn't know what it meant, but because I did. I kept the vows in a drawer under the sink. Not a box, not a folder, just a drawer, the kind with loose batteries, expired coupons, and rubber bands that never get used. That way, if I ever stumbled upon them again, I could pretend it was by accident. That's how I survived it. I didn't obsess. I didn't text her. I didn't go through old photos or play the songs we used to drive around to. I just let the silence grow moss over everything. But silence doesn't mean peace. It just means there's no sound. And when the honeymoon ended figuratively and literally, that silence started to feel like another person in the room. My wife and I argued about small things, dishes, towels left on the bed. My lack of enthusiasm when she showed me Pinterest boards for redecorating the guest room. Sometimes we didn't argue, we just hovered around each other. Like people who'd been stuck in an elevator and learned to make do until the rescue came. She worked late. I said I didn't mind. I worked from home and picked up extra shifts for our charity's fundraising calendar. I started jogging again. Even though I hated it, it helped me stay out of the house during sunset, when everything got too quiet. One night, I was jogging past the west end of the park when I saw a wedding party setting up, folding chairs in perfect rows, string lights going up in the trees. It was golden hour, and someone was doing a mic test. I slowed down, caught my breath, watched a woman in a slate gray dress adjust the centerpieces. She had her back to me. It wasn't her. Of course it wasn't. But for a second, just a second, I felt the ache like it was new again. About 3 months after the wedding, my wife's sister invited us to her birthday dinner. Just family, small group, casual. I wore a navy button-up I hadn't ironed and made a joke about showing up fashionably underdressed. People laughed politely, until Chloe walked in. She wasn't supposed to be there, but apparently, she and my sister-in-law had become really close over the past year. Yoga class, book club, whatever. My wife said nothing, just offered a tight smile and poured herself another glass of wine. Chloe waved, said, "Hi, Jonah." I nodded. Hey. Her hair was longer than I remembered, and darker. She wore a linen shirt, tucked in, with wide-legged pants. She looked like someone who'd spent time healing, but didn't feel the need to prove it. I tried to look away, but the whole night, I knew exactly where she was in the room, even when I wasn't looking. At some point, people started talking about the wedding. Ours. Someone joked about the garter toss. Someone else mentioned the food. And then my aunt said, "Those vows, Jonah." I still think about that line about the storms and the voice. What was it again? I glanced at my wife. She was swirling her wine, not looking up. I cleared my throat. Chloe spoke softly. It was, "In the silence between storms, I found your voice." My aunt beamed. Yes, that's it. So poetic. People nodded. Someone else added. She read it like a movie character. My wife finally looked up. Yeah, she said. She's very good at reading things that don't belong to her. And just like that, the air left the room. Chloe's face didn't change. She just excused herself to the bathroom. I stood there, staring at my plate. Someone tried to laugh, to cut the tension. My cousin made a joke about someone dropping the dessert tray. But I knew what had happened. My wife wasn't jealous. She was tired of seeing me haunted. That night, back at home, we didn't fight. We didn't talk at all. She went to bed early. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the dishes in the sink. Eventually, I opened that drawer under the sink, pulled out the paper, sat at the table with it, not to read it, just to hold it. It felt heavier than it should. That's the thing about memories, they weigh nothing, but carry everything. The next morning, I got up early and went for a drive. No destination, just roads and turns. I ended up in front of Chloe's building. I don't know why. I sat in the car for 20 minutes, engine off, windows fogging slightly. The world hadn't quite woken up yet. Then I saw her coming out. She didn't see me at first. She had headphones in, a gym bag slung over her shoulder. Then she looked up and froze. I got out of the car. "Hi," I said. She pulled one earbud out. "Jonah, I'm not here for anything." She raised an eyebrow. "I mean, I didn't plan this. I was just driving." She nodded slowly. "Okay, I wanted to say thank you for the vows." She shrugged. "They were yours." "Still." She looked at me for a long time, then said, "You look tired." I laughed. "I feel tired." She glanced at the sun rising behind me. "Marriage will do that." Silence again. I said, "Did you mean it when you read them?" Chloe didn't flinch. "I meant every word." I nodded. I figured. She shifted the gym bag on her shoulder. I didn't do it to make a scene. I know. I did it because I loved you once, and I wanted the version of you who wrote those words to be remembered, even if I wasn't the one standing across from you. My throat tightened. You were brave, I said. No, she replied, just honest. Then she turned, walked toward the sidewalk, and I let her go. I drove home without music. My wife was in the kitchen when I walked in, sipping coffee. She didn't ask where I'd been. I sat down across from her. We didn't speak, but we didn't need to. She knew, and I think she always had. That night, I took the vows out one last time. I read them slowly, line by line. I folded the paper into a small square, lit a match, watched it burn in the sink until it curled into ash and the flame kissed my fingers. I didn't cry, didn't flinch, but I felt something loosen in me. Not grief, not regret, just space. Space for something else to come. Something not haunted, not borrowed, not read aloud by someone who didn't write it but loved it anyway. The next few weeks passed like fog rolling in on the highway. I went to work, came home, nodded through small talk with my wife, and laid beside her in bed like a body outlined in chalk. Neither of us said what we were thinking. We just learned to breathe in rhythm quietly, politely like strangers in a library. The wedding photos arrived from the photographer in a neat little folder. I opened them alone one evening, sitting at the kitchen counter with a glass of orange wine and a mind half present. There we were, smiling under an arch of peonies, holding hands, laughing beside the cake, the kind of images you'd expect to find in a bridal magazine. But I couldn't stop staring at the eyes. Mine. Mostly. They looked kind, but distant, like I was playing the role of the groom in someone else's story. And hers my wife's. They looked alert, like she'd known something was off, even then, and chose to keep going anyway. I flipped through until I found a shot of the wedding party lined up at the altar. Chloe stood at the edge, hands clasped, slightly apart from the others. Her eyes weren't on the bride, or the crowd, or the camera. They were on me. Just for a second. But there it was. One Saturday morning, my wife brought up the idea of couples therapy. She said it like she was offering to clean out the fridge something practical, responsible, overdue. I said sure. She chose the therapist. We went to the first session in silence, hands folded in our laps. The waiting room smelled like eucalyptus and beige furniture. There was a bowl of hard candy that no one touched. We were both early. The therapist, Diane, had soft gray hair and glasses that made her look like she'd seen thousands of people come and go through the same doors. She asked us questions gently, like she was tiptoeing over cracks in a frozen lake. What brings you here? We hesitated. Then I spoke. I think we've been performing, I said, like we got so good at being okay that we forgot how to be real. My wife blinked, surprised, but she didn't disagree. We talked about the wedding, about Chloe, about silence, about guilt, about pressure. We didn't fight. We just unloaded. Like two people finally allowed to put down a heavy box. Diane nodded through it all. Then she said, "You both speak like people who have rehearsed your own stories. What would it sound like if you stopped performing?" Neither of us had an answer. But I felt something shift again. After the fourth session, we went to get ramen downtown. It was raining, and we didn't have an umbrella. So we ran, laughing as we slipped down the slick sidewalk. It was the first time in months that I saw my wife's real smile, not the tight, camera-ready one, but the crooked grin she used to wear in grocery stores and gas stations when I said something dumb on purpose. We sat at the bar, steam rising from our bowls. "I still love you," she said softly, not looking up. I know, I replied. She met my eyes. Do you love me? I hesitated, not because I didn't, but because love, for me, had become something layered, tangled, and filled with echoes I hadn't yet cleared. I want to, I said honestly. She nodded, then broke the egg yolk in her bowl with her chopsticks and changed the subject to the weather. And I didn't stop her, because for once, the truth had been enough. A few days later, I received a voicemail from Chloe. She never called before, just the occasional polite message on social media, mostly around birthdays or mutual friends' milestones, but her voice on the line was soft. Hi, Jonah. I just wanted to let you know I'm moving. Out of state. New job. New everything. I thought you should hear it from me before you heard it from someone else. No need to call back. I just wanted to say, you mattered. And not just back then. I think you still do. Be well. That was it. No forwarding address, no second message, just a door quietly closing, and I respected that. But I sat with my phone in my lap for a long time anyway. I told my wife the next morning. We were sitting on the floor of the living room, organizing old books into donation piles. She called. I said, Chloe, she asked without blinking. She's leaving town. My wife paused. How do you feel about that? I was quiet. Then I said, lighter. And it was true. There was no dramatic rush of emotion, no bittersweet montage, just a slow, subtle untying of something inside me, a knot that had been there for years, loosening, without ceremony. My wife nodded. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. I think we're getting better, she whispered. Yeah, I said. Me too. The next time we saw Chloe was at a going-away dinner organized by her coworkers. It was public, low stakes, and brief. We were invited as courtesy guests, no speeches, no toasts, no front row seats. She looked different, freer, wore her hair up in a loose knot, eyes glowing with something that wasn't pain or nostalgia, but presence. She hugged me like an old teacher saying goodbye to a student who finally passed the course, and I hugged her back like someone grateful for everything they learned, even the hard lessons. My wife shook her hand. They exchanged a few kind, surface-level words. Then we left early. No drama, no lingering, just closure, quiet and clean. Weeks turned to months. We took a weekend trip to the coast. We adopted a rescue cat who only liked sitting in my wife's lap. I started writing again essays, short poems, fragments of things I used to scribble years ago. We talked more, not always deeply but honestly, and slowly, without us noticing. The space in our marriage filled with new things, not replacements, but truths, things we chose together, not things left behind. One morning, I opened that drawer under the sink and realized it was gone. The vows, the paper, the entire weight of it. I'd burned it months ago, but now it felt truly gone. No trace in the air, no ghost in the room, just space, just breath, just now. Sometimes I still think about that moment at the altar, the way Chloe's voice carried my words like a fragile gift, the way the room fell silent, the way I felt seen by someone I hadn't held in years. But I don't linger there, because I know now some people love you for who you were, some stay to discover who you'll become, and if you're lucky, you get to look someone in the eyes and say, I'm still figuring that out, but I'm glad you're here for it. There's a moment when you wake up beside someone and realize they're no longer a stranger to your silence, that the quiet between you isn't hollow, it's filled with shared mornings, mismatched socks, and the slow, subtle rebuilding of trust. That moment came to me one Wednesday at 6:43 a.m. The sun had crept in crooked through the blinds. Our cat, Fig, was curled in a circle between our feet, and my wife lay on her side, half awake. Hair mussed and hand tucked beneath her cheek like a child too tired to fake being grown. She looked peaceful. And for once, I didn't feel the ache of comparison. I didn't wonder who I had been before, or what someone else might think of me now. I just watched her breathe, steady and warm, and felt something quiet move inside me. It wasn't fireworks. It was something better. Stillness. Our therapist called it emotional witness. The idea that love isn't about fixing or possessing someone but witnessing them. Letting them be seen in their incomplete, unfiltered state. And staying. Anyway. It sounded lofty when she said it, but I started to notice it in small ways. Like how my wife now asked about my nonprofit events without scrolling her phone. Or how I started cooking again simple meals, but with care. We weren't trying to perform love anymore. We were learning how to practice it. One night, while folding laundry, she turned to me and said, "Do you think we rushed into marriage?" The question didn't hurt. It didn't accuse. It just hovered. I thought for a moment, then said, "I think we were both running from something." She nodded and ran into each other. I smiled. Pretty much. "But maybe that's okay," she said. "Some people fall in love on mountaintops. Others, in the wreckage." She folded a t-shirt. "What matters is who stays to clean it up." Later that week, I got an invitation to speak at a nonprofit summit. It was a small conference, mostly local organizers and program leaders, but I hadn't been asked to speak publicly in a long time. The topic was resilience. I almost declined. Then my wife said, "You should do it." I hesitated. What if I sound like someone still working through it? She touched my arm. "Then you'll sound honest." The day of the conference, I stood backstage in a modest lecture hall, holding a small stack of note cards with bullet points I hadn't really memorized. My palms were damp. My heart thudded a little too loud. I could hear the host introducing me, a leader in outreach and sustainable funding models, but more importantly, a storyteller who brings humanity to the work. Applause. I stepped out. The lights were warm. The mic was cold. The room, full. I looked around, spotted my wife in the third row. Her arms were crossed gently over her chest, watching me like I mattered. And I began. "I used to think resilience meant pretending nothing ever hurt you," I said. "But then I realized it means choosing not to become someone else because of the hurt, staying soft in a world that wants to harden you." I told stories about our work, about lost grants, long nights, burnout, and small wins. But I also shared something else. Last year, at my wedding, someone unexpected read my vows aloud. I said. There were chuckles. I continued. She wasn't supposed to. But the truth is, no one could have read them the way she did. Because she had seen the version of me who wrote them before I learned how to speak that way to the person I'd actually married. I paused. I'm learning now that resilience is also knowing when to burn the script and write something new. After the talk, a few attendees came up to thank me. A woman said it reminded her of her brother. A man shared how he'd walked away from a marriage that looked good on Instagram but felt hollow in the kitchen. But the best moment came later. In the parking lot, when my wife looped her arm into mine and said, "You looked like you were telling the truth." A month later, we moved. Nothing dramatic, just to a quieter neighborhood. More trees, less noise, a place where weekends didn't feel like obligations, and neighbors nodded without asking questions. We repainted the walls soft gray, donated half our furniture, started fresh not because we wanted to forget, but because we wanted to build with intention. The old wedding photos stayed in a shoebox in the closet. Neither of us brought it up. Neither of us had to. One Sunday morning, she brought me coffee and sat beside me on the porch steps. I got an email from Chloe, she said quietly. I blinked. You. She nodded. She sent a group message to some of us just letting everyone know she's doing okay. New job's going well. She's dating someone. Apparently. A writer. I smiled softly. That makes sense. She sipped her drink. She said to tell you hi, if I wanted. I looked at her. Do you want to? She shrugged. I already did. We both laughed. Then we sat there in the sun, coffee warm between our palms, listening to birds bicker in the trees above us. And it was enough. There's a strange freedom in knowing someone once loved you deeply and left anyway. Not because you failed them, but because life moved, and you didn't stop it. Sometimes, I still think about what it would have been like if Chloe and I had lasted, if we had made it to the altar together, if those vows had been hers to keep. But those thoughts don't sting anymore. They float, like paper lanterns over a lake briefly beautiful, then gone. We celebrated our first anniversary quietly. No party, no cake, just the two of us, sitting on a picnic blanket at the botanical gardens, passing a thermos of tea back and forth, and reading Neruda poems aloud to one another. She leaned her head on my shoulder. I kissed her hair, and somewhere in that moment, I realized I was no longer waiting for someone to see me. I was already seen, fully, by the person beside me, and for once, I saw her too. Not as a placeholder, not as a choice I made after the storm, but as the one who stayed to rebuild the house. That night, back home, she turned off the light and whispered, "Do you ever think about her? I didn't pretend." "Sometimes," I said, "and I'm grateful." "Me too," she said, "because you wouldn't be who you are without her." I turned toward her in the dark. "And I wouldn't be here without you." She didn't answer. She just reached for my hand under the covers, and we fell asleep like that, fingers tangled, breath steady. No need to run, no ghosts, just presence. Just now. Spring came slow that year. The kind of spring where the trees hesitated, where the air still held the bite of winter in the mornings, and you couldn't quite put your jackets away. But even with the delay, something about the light shifted. Softer. Maybe. More forgiving. Like the world itself was relearning how to begin again. We started planting things. Not metaphorically actual plants. My wife came home one day with a flat of herbs and a small lemon tree in a black plastic pot. She set them down on our back patio like they belonged there, like we'd always been the kind of people who kept things alive. "We should try," she said, "even if they die. Let's at least try." We did. Mint, thyme, basil, cherry tomatoes in buckets. We learned about soil drainage, about overwatering, about pests and aphids and how much sun is too much. We failed. A lot. But we laughed when we failed. I don't remember ever laughing like that during our first year. Maybe because we hadn't left enough room for failure. Only performance. That summer, we got invited to 3 weddings in 1 month. All old friends, distant cousins, people who remembered our ceremony well enough to bring it up, but not well enough to remember the details right. "You two set the bar so high," someone said to us at a reception, while tipsy and swaying slightly beside the open bar. I mean, those vows. Legendary. I smiled and nodded. My wife held her wine glass steady. Later that night, in the car, she said, "Do you think we'll ever stop being remembered for a moment that wasn't ours?" I paused, then said, "Not unless we give them something else to remember." That's how the idea started. A trip. Just us. No weddings, no family, no expectations. Not a honeymoon redo, something different. We chose Lisbon. Neither of us had ever been. It wasn't romantic in the way people usually meant it, but it was bright, textured, Real. Cobblestone streets, salt in the air, music that spilled out of windows, and pastries that didn't pretend to be healthy. We stayed in a little flat above a cafe, where the owners left us fresh rolls and oranges every morning. We walked everywhere. Slow. We didn't plan our days. One afternoon, we sat beneath a jacaranda tree in a square filled with old people feeding pigeons and young people arguing about philosophy. I turned to her. "I feel like myself again," I said. She tilted her head. Which version, I thought for a moment. A new one, but also older, softer. She smiled. "Me too." Then she pulled a notebook out of her bag. "Write me something," she said. I blinked. "What?" "Just a sentence," she said. "Doesn't have to be fancy, just something true." So I took the pen. I wrote, "You saw me when I still needed saving, but you stayed after I learned to stand." She read it, tore the page out, folded it neatly, and tucked it into her wallet. We came home different. Not dramatically, but noticeably. The house felt more like ours. We rearranged the furniture, moved the bed to the opposite wall, bought a new rug that didn't match anything, took down the wedding photos from the hallway and replaced them with prints from Lisbon. We didn't say it out loud, but we both knew we were done curating a perfect past. We were choosing the present now. Sometime in August, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. It was from Chloe. Not a long letter, just a few sentences. She said she was engaged, that he'd proposed in a bookstore, that they were planning something small, just close friends. No speeches, no altar. "I thought of you when he asked," she wrote. "Not because I had doubts, but because you taught me how to believe someone when they said they saw me. Thank you for that. Be well." I sat with it for a long time, not because it hurt, but because it didn't. I showed it to my wife later. She read it, then folded it once, carefully, and said, "She's good with words. She is." Then, quietly, "So are you." That fall, we hosted our first dinner party. Just 6 people. We made flatbread from scratch, played records, lit candles that smelled like cinnamon and cedar. It wasn't fancy, but it felt alive, real. Like our home had finally caught up with the people living inside it. Someone asked how long we'd been married. 2 years, I said. My wife chimed in. But we've only just started. Everyone laughed, but I knew what she meant. On our 2nd anniversary, we didn't do gifts. Instead, we read each other something we wrote. I scribbled mine on hotel stationery I'd saved from Lisbon. She read hers from her phone. Nervous. Both pieces were awkward, a little messy, but honest. Mine ended with, "You weren't the girl I wrote my vows for. You were the woman who helped me live them." Hers ended with, "I never wanted to be someone's safe option. I wanted to be someone's shelter. You let me be both." We didn't cry. We didn't make a big deal out of it. We just kissed, did the dishes, and fell asleep with the windows open, letting the cool air curl around our ankles. Sometimes I still think about that day at the altar, about the silence in the room after Chloe read my vows, about the way my heart beat too fast and then too slow, about how everything seemed to split and somehow begin. But I don't dwell on it, because that moment, as loud and strange and unforgettable as it was, didn't define me. It revealed me. And once revealed, I had no choice but to grow. Now, when people ask about our wedding, I tell them the truth, that it was complicated, beautiful, but flawed, memorable, but heavy, and that the real marriage began later, when the cameras were gone, the guests were home, and the work of staying had just begun. I tell them vows are just words, but showing up every day is the language love speaks fluently, And I say it knowing there's no one right way to do this. Only honest ways, only kind ones. This morning, I found my wife in the garden, clipping basil and humming off key. I stood there for a minute before she noticed me. When she did, she grinned. "What?" "Nothing," I said. "Just watching you. Being real." She held up a sprig. "Smell this." I did. And it smelled like us. Not perfume, not candles, just growth. Messy, living, ordinary growth. And I loved it. I loved her. I love this. Exactly as it was. The first frost came early that year. It crept in quietly overnight, icing over our garden in delicate lace. The basil withered first. The tomatoes clung to their vines like they didn't know it was over. My wife stood at the sliding glass door that morning with her mug in both hands, watching the herbs bow under the weight of cold. "We should have covered them," she said softly. I joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "We didn't know." She rested her head against my shoulder. "We always think we have more time." Neither of us moved for a while. The cat curled at our feet. The sun, reluctant and pale, began to rise. Later that morning, I dug up what was left of the lemon tree. Its roots were tangled, brittle, barely holding on. I didn't cry, but my hands lingered around the soil longer than they needed to. That little tree had been our first dare to nurture something when we were still learning how to care for ourselves. My wife came outside with a thermos and sat on the steps, watching me work. "Want to try again in the spring?" she asked. I looked up. "Do you?" She nodded. "But maybe this time, we do it together. From the beginning." A few weeks later, my father had a minor heart attack. It was the kind of event that starts with a phone call in the middle of a Tuesday and ends with you sitting on a vinyl hospital chair under fluorescent lights that never go dim. My mother was already there when I arrived, clutching a foam coffee cup with a lid she'd been twisting and untwisting all day. "He's stable," she said quickly. "They're keeping him overnight." I nodded. "What did the doctor say?" She looked down. "He needs to slow down." It was strange seeing him like that, tubes, monitors, his chest rising and falling with mechanical precision. He'd always been sturdy, stern. A man who mowed his lawn every Saturday morning and never missed a utility bill payment. Now he looked small, human. He opened his eyes when I sat beside him. "Jonah," he rasped. "I'm here." He reached for my hand with surprising strength. "You okay?" I blinked. "You're the one in the hospital." He gave a weak smile. "Still your dad." I looked at him. There were so many things I wanted to say, about our distance, about the things we never spoke aloud, about the wedding, and Chloe, and how he hadn't said anything that day, but I knew he'd noticed everything. But I said none of it. I just held his hand, and let that be enough for now. That night, I called my wife from the parking garage. She answered on the first ring. "Are you all right?" "Yeah," I said. "I just needed to hear your voice." "I'm here," she said. No questions, no pressure, just presence. I exhaled. "I love you." A pause. Then, "I know." After Dad was discharged, we helped set up a chairlift for the stairs at my parents' house. My wife organized his pillbox and taught my mom how to set reminders on her phone. I watched them from the hallway, talking over dosages and side effects, and something about it hit me in a way I wasn't prepared for. This woman I married. She was no longer just my partner. She was family. Not because of a wedding, but because of who she became when things got hard, who she let me become, too. That December, we skipped the big holiday party, stayed in instead, cooked a roast, played records, watched old home videos from when we were both too young to know what love would someday cost. Sometime after midnight, while snow pressed softly against the window panes, I reached under the couch and pulled out a wrapped box I hadn't mentioned. She raised an eyebrow. We said no gifts. I lied. She laughed. You always lie about gifts. She unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a framed copy of the note I wrote in Lisbon, the one she'd tucked into her wallet and folded so carefully. She looked up at me, eyes shining. You kept it. I memorized it. I said. But I wanted you to see it every day. She ran her fingers over the glass, then leaned forward and kissed me like it was the first time again. On New Year's Eve, we went up to the roof with 2 glasses of cheap champagne and a blanket around our shoulders. The city sparkled below, cold and bright. Fireworks waited in the distance like promises. She nestled into me. Any resolutions, she asked? Maybe one. I said. She turned to look at me. I want to stop living in the shadow of the past. I said. I want us to grow something new, something that belongs only to us. She nodded. Me too. That spring, we planted again. This time, we researched properly, took our time, dug deeper. We planted hydrangeas along the fence, rosemary near the kitchen door, and sunflowers where the light stayed longest. And another lemon tree stronger this time. We named it Lisbon. We knelt in the soil together, hands dirty, sweat on our foreheads, laughter echoing off the side of the house. I watched her tie back her hair with a scrap of ribbon and thought, this is it. Not the wedding, not the ceremony. This, a shared effort, a quiet kind of joy. The work of building something no one else will ever fully understand. We didn't talk about Chloe much anymore, but when we did, it wasn't with pain. It was with perspective. She was part of the story, but not the ending. Just one of the bridges we crossed to get here. And sometimes, when I reread those old vows not on paper, but in the life we live now, I realize I meant them more today than I ever could have then. Because now they're not words, they're actions, and they belong to us. Fully. Finally. One morning, a stranger knocked on our door. She was elderly, hunched slightly, with a wool scarf wrapped around her neck and a book in her hand. I used to live here, she said, decades ago. Before you two, before the garden. We let her in, made her tea, showed her the lemon tree, the new backsplash in the kitchen, the framed print in the hallway. She smiled at everything. You've taken good care of it, she said, touching the windowsill. Thank you, my wife said. As she left, she paused on the porch and looked back. You know, she said, homes remember love, even after people forget. Then she shuffled down the walk and disappeared into the morning. That night, I sat beside my wife on the couch, her head on my chest, the sound of the cat purring softly between us. Do you think it's true? I whispered. That homes remember. She was quiet a moment, then said, if they do, I hope ours remembers this. I smiled. Me too. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need to be seen by the whole world. I just needed to be seen by the one person who chose to stay. Not because I was broken, not because I was perfect, but because we were both willing to try again, and again, and again. Until what we grew between us wasn't memory, but home. The lemon tree bloomed the following spring. Not fully, not like in magazines or garden catalogs, but a soft, defiant bloom. Tiny white flowers, delicate and shy, opened along its young branches like it had decided to believe in the sun again. We found them one morning after a storm had swept through, scattering petals from the neighbor's magnolia into our yard. My wife knelt beside the pot, touching one of the blossoms gently with her fingertip. It's happening, she whispered, almost like she didn't want to scare it off. I crouched beside her. It chose us. She smiled. No, it chose the light. She stood, brushed dirt from her knees, and walked into the house, leaving me alone with the bloom and the sound of wind moving through wet leaves. I stayed there longer than I meant to, hand resting lightly on the lip of the pot, breathing in the sharp, clean scent of a life that had almost never been. Later that week, we took a short trip to the coast. It wasn't for an anniversary or a milestone, just a quiet impulse, the kind we'd grown better at honoring. We booked a weathered cottage near a bluff, far from phone service or expectations. There were no mirrors in the bedroom, only windows, and that felt like enough. We walked along the shore in our bare feet, watched the waves punch the rocks and retreat, collected smooth stones we didn't intend to keep. On the second night, sitting by the fireplace with our legs tangled and the fire cracking low, my wife turned to me and asked, "Do you still write things you don't share?" I blinked. "Why?" She shrugged. "You have that look sometimes, like there's a whole conversation happening inside you." I reached into my bag, pulled out a small notebook I hadn't opened in weeks. "I don't always know what to do with it," I said. She reached for it. "Can I read something?" I hesitated, then handed it over. She flipped to a page near the back, read silently, then aloud. "There is a version of me that still lives in the pause right before the vows, right before her voice filled the silence. But that version is no longer the loudest one. He's just a ghost who finally learned how to listen." She closed the notebook. "That's beautiful," she said. "It's honest." She reached for my hand. "Thank you," she said, "for staying." When we returned home, the basil was gone again. Another frost, another misjudged season, but we didn't mourn it this time. We composted the soil, washed the pots, and made plans to start over. It had become our rhythm. Try, lose, try again. And somewhere in that repetition, we had found a kind of peace. Not perfection, but peace. A few days after we got back, I received an invitation in the mail, hand-addressed in navy ink, heavy cardstock, a wax seal on the back. It was from Chloe. A wedding invitation. Simple, elegant. Her name and his, the date and location. A small line at the bottom. Intimate ceremony. No speeches, just presents. I stared at it for a long time. My wife found me in the kitchen, still holding it. "She's getting married," I said quietly. She didn't ask. "To who or how does that make you feel?" She just stepped forward, pressed her palm over mine, and said, "Do you want to go?" I looked at her. "I don't think I need to," I said. "Then let's send a gift," she replied, like it was the simplest thing in the world. And maybe it was. We sent a small potted olive tree, with a note that said, "For the years ahead, for the light you now get to share, no signature, no return address, just presence." Summer arrived loud and full. The garden thickened. The lemon tree bore its first tiny fruit round, green, determined. We spent Saturday mornings at the farmer's market, tasting honey samples and buying peaches we ate over the sink, juice running down our wrists. My wife started painting again, not for anyone, just for herself. I watched her work from the doorway, brush in hand, brow furrowed in that beautiful way she did when she was fully inside something. "I don't know what it's supposed to be," she said once, gesturing toward a canvas of soft, abstract shapes. "You don't have to," I said. "It already is." She laughed. That's such a writer thing to say. But she didn't disagree. In early July, we held a small dinner in our backyard. Just a few friends. String lights. A big bowl of pasta passed around like communion. I gave a toast. Unscripted. Short. To second drafts. I said. To the things that grow after we stop trying to control them. There were smiles, nods, the clink of glasses. Afterward, when the dishes were stacked and the music faded, one of our guests lingered at the gate. She looked at me and said, "You two, you look like you chose each other. Not just once, but every day." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, and in my chest, something exhaled. Later that night, in bed, my wife traced her finger along the inside of my wrist. "Do you remember when you let her read your vows?" she asked. Voice barely above a whisper. I turned to face her. "Yes." "Do you ever wish it had gone differently?" I took a breath. "No," I said, "because it brought me here." She smiled, not with her mouth, with her eyes. And I kissed her. Not because I had something to prove, but because I had nothing to hide. In the years that followed, we didn't stop stumbling. We still forgot anniversaries, still argued about laundry, still had nights where the silence wasn't sacred, just tired. But we knew where to return. Not to an altar, not to a photo album, to each other. And that was enough. One afternoon, sitting in the garden with dirt on our hands and sun on our backs, she looked up from the lemon tree and said, "I think it's strong enough now, for what to survive a winter." I looked at it, its trunk thicker, leaves glossy, the small yellow fruit clinging tight. I smiled. "Yeah, I think it is." And I realized she wasn't talking about the tree. She was talking about us. And she was right. We'd been through a storm. We'd stood in silence. We'd heard old words read by an old love. But in the end, we wrote new ones. Together. And this time, we didn't need anyone else to read them aloud, because we were already living them. Every day. Word by word. Root by root. Bloom by bloom. We never built a legacy anyone would write about. No mansion, no children running through hallways, no framed magazine covers. But we built something that mattered, something invisible and quiet. We built a life that didn't echo with the voices of old wounds. We built mornings that started with coffee and silence, and evenings that ended with books read aloud in bed. We built forgiveness, not just for each other, but for the people we used to be. And in that quiet steadiness, something holy took root. One morning, I woke up before her. The light hadn't crested fully through the blinds. Our bedroom was still wrapped in soft blue. I turned my head to look at her, the rise and fall of her breath, the faint crease near her mouth from sleep. I thought about how long it had taken me to see her clearly. Not as a counterpart to what I lost, not as a symbol of healing, but as herself. Entire, independent, and willing to love me anyway. That day, we didn't do anything special. We went to the grocery store. We stopped for gas. We debated the merits of oat milk versus almond milk. And somehow, that was everything. There was no dramatic climax, no fireworks, just trust. And trust, I've learned, is a quieter miracle than love. Chloe emailed us once, not long after her wedding. She sent a photo herself, barefoot in a field, wind catching the hem of her dress, her new husband beside her, grinning. "Thank you." Her message said, "For not holding on." I didn't reply. Didn't need to. The chapter had ended, but it hadn't closed on pain. It had closed with peace. Years passed. The lemon tree grew tall enough to shade the back patio. My hair thinned. My wife got glasses. We built shelves, painted rooms, started composting. We joined a trivia night team with the couple next door and lost every game with pride. We were never flashy. We just kept showing up. On our 5th anniversary, we went back to the church, not inside just the courtyard. We stood at the same spot where the ceremony began, where the vows were read aloud by someone who loved me too much to let me pretend. I looked at my wife. I've thought about that moment more times than I can count. I said. She waited. And every time, I realized I was never truly ready that day. She raised an eyebrow, and now I smiled. I don't think you're ever ready for the right person. You just become ready by staying. She stepped forward, rested her forehead on mine. No one ever reads us our lines anymore. She whispered. Good, I said. We're better when we write them ourselves. We didn't kiss then. We didn't need to. We just stood there. Two people who had finally outgrown the need to be witnessed by anyone but each other. And maybe that was the vow we were always meant to make. Not I will love you, but I will choose you, even after I forget why. Later that evening, we sat in the garden. She was pruning dead leaves from the rosemary bush. I was digging out weeds from the edge of the path, and I looked around at the life we had built. Uneven, earned, loved into existence. I had once thought that heartbreak came from losing love, but now I knew the truth. Heartbreak comes from giving up on the work love requires. We hadn't given up, and that was enough. That would always be enough. If you've ever stood at the edge of a ceremony and felt like you weren't the one being celebrated, know this: the room isn't where your story ends. The silence afterward isn't the end of the song. It's the pause where something more honest begins. And when the people around you forget your name, or your moment, or the words you wrote, let them, because your real vows will live in the way you stay, and build, and water what still wants to bloom, even when it almost didn't, especially then.